And you are live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are in the House Education Committee. It is February 26th at about 1:15 p.m. We're here this afternoon with Secretary of Education Zoe Saunders and also our liaison to Ways and Means, Rep. Holcomb, and I believe our liaison to Appropriations might be joining us at some point, Rep. Warwicky. So we're going to talk a little bit about the transformation budget that the AOE has proposed for this budget cycle. So, Secretary Saunders.
Okay. Thank you for having me. For the record, I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. I'm also joined by Sean Kusno, our interim CFO.
Thank
And I will share my screen. We did provide a document to walk you through some more specifics regarding the budget proposal for the transformation plan. So if you'll give me one moment, I will share my screen. Right one. Sorry, for 1 second. So as I'm managing the technology here, so make sure the right one. I'll just walk you through. We are very excited to share this opportunity with you. We do see, we've heard questions around building capacity for the agency to support the field. This is part of that plan. It is informed by the input that we have received through the commitment for and what we've heard from our educators and education leaders would be beneficial for the agency to provide support.
And for anybody watching at home, we are having some construction at the State House. I apologize for the noise. Didn't we start?
Right to that man.
We have to upload it.
So the request is for $4 million and it's broken down into 3 primary components. I'll note that none of these requests represent any work that is currently being done within job duties of existing agency staff, but it is very complementary of the work that is underway at the agency and provides additional capacity for us to extend that work and to maximize our impact in the field. This will be particularly important as we contemplate the transformation. We know that any change within the education system could be disruptive to teaching and learning. And so it's very important to us at the agency that we're able to ramp up our support to the field, are ensuring high quality instruction through this transition and also providing support relative to the budgeting as we think about transitioning to a new funding formula along with supporting the formation of the new boards. These resources would be through contracts. And so we, as part of this approach, is thinking about also tapping into local expertise across the state to inform this work. And some of that would need to be negotiated with existing contracts that are in place in terms of employment agreements. We do anticipate that through this work, we will build the capacity of the agency. There'll be an intentional process where the contracted service providers would be working with our agency staff and experts. This is also part of our broader plan to evaluate the needs in terms of expanding the capacity of the agency. And so making sure that there's some thought to some of this, these competencies needing to be part of our full-time staffing in the future. And we want to do that in a way that is, driven on the strategy of the organization. And so that'll be part of subsequent planning. The first part of this is focusing on the financial transformation and the budgeting support. Part of this would be identifying ways in which we can model the financial impact of the fiscal year 27 state foundation grant. We would be developing further criteria to evaluate the need for any adjusted funding based on circumstances. This support would help us to evaluate the financial and operational viability of the forming districts. So that terminology is something we introduced yesterday. So that represents those districts that are currently in place. We recognize the need of the agency to provide support with stabilization. We have been doing that over the past year and have started to develop an internal dashboard to identify those districts that could benefit from additional support. So this contracted service would help us to expand our capacity to do that through developing an early warning system, helping us to intervene proactively in collaborating and supporting the field. As part of this work, there may be identification for those districts that may not be financially viable, and they would warrant some additional support as we think about potentially sharing resources across different districts and before the transformation year of fiscal year 28, and helping us to facilitate that for those that can benefit most from the support. Also, for financial management, we're providing target training and budget support. That is looking at achieving both the short-term cost containment for fiscal year 27 and beginning to think about future planning with the transition to the foundation funding formula. These strategies started to be implemented this year. We actually did bring a new Solutions K-12 that's been providing support to the field in strategic budgeting and precise staffing. Those have been resources available. This would be more on the ground support and intensifying that given some of the changes, and that this is a big shift in how we think about budgeting. So we know that there's additional support required. As part of that, we will be developing tools and dashboards to really kind of support scenario planning as districts are identifying their priorities and thinking about how best to utilize their funds to support educational quality. This funding would help us again to do the on the ground training and support for the 119 districts that are currently in place. Our support this year was largely virtual, and so we see that there's a need for more of the on the ground support and being able to roll up our sleeves with business managers and other district staff to support with budgeting for the fiscal year 27 and also planning towards the transition to the foundation formula. We know in addition to developing some of the tools in terms of doing different modeling, it'd be helpful to have dashboards available. These dashboards would be designed to support with the strategic budgeting and also alignment to the accountability and equity goals of the state. In terms of our process, would you like me to pause after each section, or do you want me to go through the full scope of the plan and then entertain questions after?
I think it's not very long, so I think we'll
Okay.
go through the whole scope and then get questions after.
Great.
Does that work for everybody?
The second area of focus is on education quality and accountability. So the additional resources requested will help us to strengthen the state's accountability framework to also support the agency's development and implementation of the strategic plan to improve our support to districts and schools. We, as I recognized earlier in the conversation, know that change can be disruptive to teaching and learning, and that could put the state at risk for a downturn in academic performance. So that's why we feel really strongly that additional resources would be beneficial in this transition period. It would be beneficial without the transition, but particularly important as you think about some of the changes that we are contemplating. We recently had the U.S. Department of Education do a monitoring visit of the Agency of Education. That report has not been released yet, but they have shared early findings with us that we are proactively working to address. And those findings relate to ensuring teacher equity, statewide graduation requirements, improvements to continuous improvement in our accountability system, special education monitoring, parental engagement, and a couple other critical areas that we are working towards that are not as high leverage, but are areas that we will continue to support from a continuous improvement perspective. So irrespective of the transition, we know that there's additional support in these key areas that we are starting to work on. We are developing an action plan in response to these findings, but we see this as an opportunity to further elevate our support in these areas to achieve our collective goals of really improving performance statewide. Related to the transition specifically, we recognize that there's additional direction and support that would be needed as we think about achieving our goals of high quality academic performance during this transition. So I'll walk through some of the areas where our consultants can provide support. I do want to note that this is building off of some intentional efforts by the agency to provide more on the ground support. And This has been crafted intentionally to identify areas where we think we can extend and amplify our reach in the field to better meet our goals. So one is to develop an early warning system. Again, this is a proactive approach. Previously, we talked about that from a financial perspective in the warning system. This is related to identifying academic intervention needs and continuous improvement support. Again, the idea is to do this early on and be proactive so that the agency can be an effective and strong partner in the field. Second would be to design tools and resources to support data-driven instruction and curriculum alignment across districts. As you have seen, we have enhanced reporting around statewide trends. We're looking to really enhance reporting at the level of the district school down to the classroom to support the data-driven instruction needs. And we would be doing that work in consultation with educators in the field around what would be most important. We often hear them talking about having to spend a lot of time in Excel spreadsheets and kind of manipulating their own data. This would be a way for us to really identify how we can help to streamline that for our educators so that they can shift their focus from pulling down the data to using the data to support instruction. The consultant will also help us with redesigning our special education monitoring approach and providing targeted support. We are currently for special education in the needs assistance status. And this would be an area for us to be able to increase our oversight and support. We have already increased our off-cycle monitoring visits and are providing more support in the field from our special education team over the last year. This is a way for us to really think intentionally around designing systems and tools to support that overall monitoring. All of this, I should have noted at the beginning, would be overseen in coordination with the Chief Academic Officer position. That is a position that we've added at the agency that is already fully funded. And we will begin recruiting for that role in the coming weeks. Another area is to evaluate data collection timelines, also work more intently on our validation processes. You've noted over the last year that we've been doing a lot around data validation. And so we're looking to systemize that in ways that will really ensure there's consistent data sets that everyone is using to drive improvement. This work would be done in alignment with national best practices and also ensuring federal guidelines and reporting requirements. We also are interested in providing more on-the-ground school improvement planning and support to really address vulnerabilities and equip schools and districts with the tools and resources to promote high-quality instruction. We think this is particularly important as we think about some of the transition elements for next year. And then lastly, to design a teacher equity data monitoring system to ensure all students have access to high-quality teachers. One of the findings that we had from the federal government that we don't have a great way of ensuring that our high-needs students are connected with a highly qualified teacher. And so it warrants us to do a further review of evaluating that and supporting those important connections. And then lastly, the funding would help to support the transformation work regarding the transition to new school boards. And this would be twofold. One is really thinking about the existing board, or what we've been calling the forming board, and really clarifying roles and responsibilities during the transition period. They play a really critical role as you think about some of the closeout activities and evaluating the needs of the district, along with identifying opportunities and recommendations that the new boards should be aware of relevant to their specific community needs. And also to develop curriculum and training for new boards in alignment with district quality standards. And this would be done really in coordination with the districts and with leadership as well. The idea here is for us to develop a process where we can evaluate the evidence-based high quality instructional materials, including in that process is input from the field. We've heard that loud and clear from the Listen and Learn tour that it'd be very helpful to have a menu of options from which to pick that have been reviewed and are evidence-based to support the field with that decision making. So those are the structure of how we've approached this. We think it's really critically important to the transformation efforts and also very important to building capacity of the Agency of Education to meet the needs of the field. And it's in alignment with what we have heard through the listen and learn tour are areas where we have been requested to provide additional support in driving educational quality and improvement statewide.
Thank you.
Now we're open to questions.
Yeah, in just a second, but, what would not having this funding effectively do to the transformation proposal that the AOE has put in place? Would it halt it altogether, or would it just affect the timeline, or what's the?
So I think what will be critical with the transformation is having strong leadership from the Agency of Education. And these resources are targeted to support that transition and to address what we have diagnosed might be vulnerabilities within our system. During a year of unpredictability, we're trying as much as possible to stabilize the system. So I would say these are critically important for us to achieve our transformation goals the way we want to, right? I mean, I think that this funding is critical in our ability to get the transformation work right, because it will resource us to do that additional work. This is certainly helping to build our capacity for the future, right? And continuous improvement in our areas that are critical regardless of the transformation. But I think are really, really necessary for the transformation work to be done well. And in our lesson and learn, we asked a lot of questions. We went into the community, we talked with educators, and we asked, how is the agency best serving you and where are their gaps? What we heard was when there's major legislation, the agency didn't always have the resources to provide that support with the implementation. So I think this is an area where as a state, we can really learn from those past lessons and ensure that we're allocating resources to effectively support landmark legislation that's going to achieve the goals that we all desire.
Thank you. Revlon?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One, you've been mentioning a number of times, and it's certainly in here. I mean, the start of all of this is that this requires job duties outside of the agency staff. So you're going to go with contracts and contracted services. Could you just give me a little more understanding of how that process works out, and what will the process be to ensure you have contract?
Are you thinking about the technical procurement process or more like the broader
I want-
picture?
I want both.
Okay,
And then I do have a follow-up question that's sort of related to this.
okay.
But this,
So this would, follow our standard protocol for, an RFP process to get the right expertise to support us with this work. And I can certainly provide additional details around what those processes and procedures are that we would need to adhere to. We within the agency have been effective in accelerating that as much as we can to get the right resources in place for these large scale projects. Holistically, this is part of, we're really transforming our education system and we're building capacity of the agency at the same time. So we're in the process of developing our strategic plan, and it's important for us to do that work first before identifying specific permanent positions, because we need to be strategic in ensuring that any additional, expansion of the agency will be aligned to those critical needs. So this allows us to bring in contracted services to support with what we've identified are immediate needs, build capacity of the agency, and also identify where there may be a need for permanent positions to ensure continuity of operations and support from the agency moving forward. So it's our way to be very methodical, very responsible with taxpayer dollars around really building capacity in a way that's going to, one, meet the immediate needs of the field and our goals for transformation, and to build the capacity of your state agency to really be a strong partner in this working group.
and if you're okay with me, just the other question I had was about, you mentioned in here about data gathering and the monitoring and all of that. Is that going to require a new system, or is that part of? So how are we going to improve what we have?
So we have a number of systems that we've implemented some new data collection tools, which are providing some efficiencies already with data collection. We're also in the process of identifying related to IEP management, the user requirements for a system to support with monitoring. So I think what we're identifying is we need some additional could benefit from some additional expertise in really perfecting those user requirements and needs and thinking intentionally around how we can map those systems to support the integrated oversight.
So it's not purchase of a new software system.
No,
We all
we
know
would
how
need,
challenging that is.
no, we would, there's a lot more pre-planning that would be
Okay.
required before that would work, that would happen, but I would see these contracted services helping us to identify where there may be needs in the future for a new system adoption, or there might be needs for kind of refinements to our current systems, maybe having a different module or something of that nature.
Okay.
But this is a way for us, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We want to make sure that we're being planful and that we're being strategic with how we are, improving not only our capacity, but our data systems as well.
Thank you.
Did you have a question? That's right, okay.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the bullet that says design a teacher equity data monitoring system?
So this was an area where we did have a finding from the federal government that we don't have a very effective process in place right now to evaluate that every child has access to a high quality teacher. So this would be having support in developing and designing a system to improve our data collection and also improve training. We understand it also that there are some technical challenges with some of our staff that are on provisional licenses and actually being able to attain their license. There's some burden that is placed on the districts that we need to understand better to help support in those teachers being able to complete the program. So that would be part of that evaluation as well.
Right, Helen, did you have-
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to something you said earlier, around agency capacity, and definitely appreciate sort of the acknowledgement from your Listen, Learn tour that you had heard from the field that some, I don't know what you would call them, lack of capacity or operational deficits with the agency have, prevented certain initiatives from really being fully implemented. I think Mr. Levinson had referenced Act 173, and I think that's maybe one of the things you were referring to earlier. So I think that there's definitely a train of thought out there, and I would say I tend to follow this, that, there's some pretty clear lessons from maybe the last decade that we know need to be addressed, maybe in the more immediate term, as opposed to on, a 2 to 3 year horizon. So, as we think about building capacity at the agency, I guess, what do you say to folks who want to see sort of more immediate permanent capacity building as sort of one of the preliminary steps to whatever transformation ends up looking like?
I would say in the last year, we've already made strides in building capacity. So we launched Read Vermont to support the implementation of Act 139. So when I first came into this role, I was really excited that the state was in the process of developing that major legislation. I think it's critically important. My first question was, how are we going to support this? So I was able to work with our team and also support from some of the funding that the governor had through the year funds to implement over $1 million initiative to support the implementation of our major reading legislation. That was designed with input from the Literacy Advisory Council and what we've heard from our educators they needed most, which was really the job embedded coaching. So that initiative is designed and off the ground right now in providing coaching across our state. We also have, through that initiative, developed learning communities, training, and we're providing resources as well to parents to help them reinforce those skills to develop early literacy. So that's an example of, with this major legislation, that's a new model that in my role coming in, I made sure that we had resources and initiative designed and funded to support that implementation. We are getting good feedback from that program, and that it really is aligned and designed in a way that educators have asked for. So that's one example already of how we've built capacity. Another is we've heard feedback around our state assessment results, and that those results are not delivered in a timely enough way for them to be relevant. And so I've been working with our team to accelerate our reporting timeline for this. We were able to do it for this first cycle and being able to get the state assessment results out earlier than we had before. And we're looking to further improve that for our next cycle, along with enhancing our data reporting and tools to the field, because we know that that information is to be relevant. Additionally, in terms of just improvements we've made, we've identified that there are certain gaps within our accountability framework where certain schools, because of their size, were not actually part of our accountability framework because they were too small. And so that limits them from accessing some improvement dollars, grant funding. We actually have already implemented 2 amendments to the U.S. Department of Education to address some of those accountability issues to strengthen our accountability. So that's another concrete way that already in the last year, we've strengthened our capacity. We are bringing on a chief academic officer. So I've done a review of kind of our needs and what we want to do as an additional support around academics and instruction and curriculum and really supporting with that alignment. So that's another capacity that we're building in that was able to do with our existing funding to ensure we have the right staffing in place. Additional capacity issues, we've really improved our data reporting, data validation. So as you know, we released our state education profile first in the summer. And that was our first time where we brought together a lot of disparate data sources to do mapping and more comprehensive analysis. And what we found when we did that is we had errors. And so what I committed to the field is we were going to correct those, and we did. And we brought in business managers, we brought in principals, and we really got deep into the data. We identified some longstanding coding inconsistencies. We identified some challenges with how we had done the mapping of those data files, and we made improvements to how we're doing the analysis. We re-released that report with expanded analysis. So that's just another very concrete way where we're already building capacity. We're doing this work, and we're doing it in a way that's really strategic and is aligned to what we hear in the field they need. So I think you can see that your agency of education in the last year has already been very responsive to the needs of the field. And I've been looking internally around how we realign our support and our expertise to make sure that we're able to deliver on those needs of the field. I mentioned also for special education, we've increased our off-cycle monitoring. So we're doing more visits in the field. We've also organized comprehensive, what I would call strike teams, or teams that are cross-functional to support struggling districts. So we have identified over the last year, there are a number of districts that have been struggling financially to ensure continuity of operations, or have been struggling with compliance of federal grants. And I've organized teams to go on the ground with those districts and work with their school boards to make improvements to stabilize those, to create stabilization for those schools. I have a lot of examples. I mean, I think what you're hearing is I'm taking this very seriously. I've heard what we need to do. We've responded to that as an agency, and we're really aligning our work in ways that I think are really impactful and are maximizing our support already to the field. One thing we continue to talk about at the agency is we do need to be thinking forward around the broader transformation, but we have to stay resolutely focused on the needs now of the field. And we know that there are immediate needs. And we're really working actively to support and help the field achieve their goals.
Thanks. That's a good. So, yeah, appreciate that. So like year 2, is there any sort of like highlights you want to give us a preview of, like, so any other positions that are maybe currently under recruitment, like the chief academic officer, sort of things that fall into that, you know, in the vein of what you just described, sort of what does that look like for the next?
Yeah. So what we've been doing as an agency is, and we'll be able to share some additional documents around kind of our initial framework for our strategic plan, but we have been supporting cross-functional alignment around our key areas of focus. So Read Vermont is an example of that. And I'll kind of get to the point of where I'm headed, just so you understand the process. So improving literacy outcomes is a responsibility of every single staff member at the Agency of Education. And we went through a process of all staff planning where we actually identified for each division what was their contribution to improving literacy outcomes for our state. And we did that over several months and helped to inform how we develop Read Vermont. It's helping to inform how all staff in every division is supporting literacy outcomes into the future. So what we've learned, so that's one cross-functional team. We've also brought together a cross-functional team around assessment and curriculum, because we know in the past what happened was our assessment system was developed separately from our proficiency-based learning hierarchies. That's a big gap. So we put those teams together to make sure that there's really clear alignment. And so those are two examples of how we've been doing cross-functional work, and there's several others. I share that because in doing that work, it's helping us to identify as an agency how we need to organize our teams differently, and structure our agency in a way that's going to really optimize the expertise that we have. We have tremendous expertise at the Agency of Education. And we have individuals that are really committed to promoting and improving outcomes for our state. And part of my work is bringing all the teams together so that we're really sharing that expertise. And that's informing what will look like in the future. And we're having conversations as an all-staff agency, as a leadership team, around what that might look like. And every single member of the staff is involved in our strategic planning. We have a meeting on a monthly basis. I send updates weekly, although legislative sessions been hard to get those out weekly, I will admit, because it's really important that everyone's involved. So when you say, what does that look like in the future in terms of staffing and alignment, that's coming through with the work we're doing now, and our teams are involved in it. So it may make sense for different teams to work in concert or work under other divisions to support that. We're doing that all together collectively as an agency, recognizing that sometimes there is a limit to what you can do on a cross-functional team, and that at some point there may need to be some transition into kind of the structure. And that's where we are in the process. So you would expect that next year through our efforts, we're really clear and solidifying what that looks like so that we are organized in a way that's best supporting the field, really maximizing the talent that we have at the agency. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean,
So that's
for
one
now,
now,
yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
for organization. I think the next step, as we talk about supporting the field, we've built tremendous capacity in this past year. We have an opportunity to refine our tools, our process, our reporting to make sure that it's really relevant. So that's definitely a focus for us moving forward. These funds that we have identified will support us in doing that work in a way that would be more impactful and more expeditious.
Any other questions? We do have a couple minutes left. Secretary Saunders, would you be open for us to maybe discuss a little bit more of what we talked about yesterday? If anybody has any questions yesterday afternoon?
Certain.
Anybody have any questions about that?
I guess I would ask one, thank you. You talked yesterday a fair bit about the sprint teams that are out there working and collecting feedback.
Yep.
And that's feedback on the proposal that we saw yesterday.
Yes.
How does that feedback reach us, since we're sort of holding all the cards right now with this?
It's a great question, and the timing of that question is perfect, because we were just talking about that this morning. So we're at the point now, we've collected really valuable feedback from the sprint teams. We're organizing that in a way to identify to what extent the policy addresses those, or there are areas that we need further inquiry. So we're codifying that and be able to share that with you in a couple of weeks.
Great. I hate to sort of us all moving on different at different speeds and to
Exactly.
not have that input be critical to what we do.
Exactly, and it's been really informative for us in our thinking as we move forward. So I think it's absolutely, as we design those sprint teams, we design those with in mind to share with the legislature. I think it's important that we're all working with the same information, and that was a way for us to capture input from the field. We've captured important considerations. Some of them we've already started to think through how to do as part of our support with the transformation. In other areas, they may be open questions that we need to have further discussions. And so
Do you suspect from the feedback you've received that you will come to us with proposed changes in what we have in front of us?
I think more is implementation. I think it's more questions around what does that look like from an implementation perspective. You'll notice in the bill, there are certain areas where we've identified a need to study. I think those are the areas where there's still some additional questions that would require further review. And then there's some areas where we've gotten really focused input that is informing how we can support the implementation.
Yeah, I guess
But potentially, to answer your question, potentially,
Yeah.
it could, and we would welcome that. I mean, as we've said from the beginning, we think this is a really good starting point. It's a very comprehensive proposal. It's thought through a lot of the key components. But in order for this to work, right, and for this to achieve our goals, it needs to be informed. And so we would expect that informed by the field, informed by your idea, So we would expect over the next few weeks, there'll be a refinement, and we're happy to engage in those conversations. Okay.
Yes, Deborah?
You might have already said this, but just thinking more about your sort of your timeline for strategic planning at the agency and trying to sort of fit that into the context of, potential education transformation for the state. So, kind of what's the timeline map for the work that you all are doing internally at the agency? You might have already said this, but just to make sure that I have a sense of it.
So we will have, what I would call kind of a brief of our strategic plan, which is outlining our priorities and key initiatives, in March. So that will be a framework, that we'll be working on and that our team will help to focus our team. I expect that will need to evolve depending on decisions around the transformation. So the final publication of that strategic plan will and should be informed by decisions that are made this legislative session around where we may need to tweak our final 5-year strategic plan and roadmap. But we will have and share and our framework, our key initiatives, because as I've said, there's already initiatives we've launched, and there's work that we need to do now, irrespective of any changes regarding the larger transformation. So coming soon,
Okay.
coming soon, and then it will be refined as we would expect through decisions made this legislative session.
Yeah, I guess, and just to, this is a little bit of commentary. That's really helpful. I guess where my brain was going with all this is, as a former state employee, I really feel like I have a strong interest in seeing sort of permanent staff become onboarded at the agency. And I know it's a lot of different factors to try to do transformation, permanent capacity building. I'm hoping, expressing my hope that this timeline is going to sort of unfold in a way that really allows for some thoughtful permanent capacity building. Because I think
Absolutely.
for me personally, Vermont state employees as opposed to contractors is a value that's important.
Absolutely. And as I said in this introduction, that's part of this design, is to help us build capacity with our existing staff, meet unmet needs, right? Address unmet needs now, and inform what additional capacity building in terms of permanent positions would be needed in the future.
Can I just, following that, you had offered when I asked the question about contracting to share the process. If you could just send us a quick memo on that, what you
The
offered,
procurement
the
process?
procurement process, that'd be really helpful. And I had asked at one point, a while ago, about sort of a grid or almost a tree of the staffing. I think it was Jill who took down all the information about what I was asking for the staffing
Okay.
at the agency, including vacancies in there. And then I had asked about, contracts, how many contracts over the last year or whatever that we had.
The team
and
is working on that.
Oh,
I
great.
wasn't
I'm
sure.
not
I didn't
trying to
realize.
rush. I'm just,
Yeah, I
I
didn't
just
realize that
wanted
was
to
your
remind.
request, but
Yeah, that was
that
part
work
of-
is underway.
That
But that's
would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
absolutely.